Ever wonder what it was like when pixels could spin dreams? Picture me as a curious kid, then a fascinated teenager glued to the glow of an old TV. This is a tale from a time before we cared about tech stuff, like frame rates when gaming was pure magic, untouched by glitches or tech debates. Video games became my escape pod, my refuge from real life hassles. When things are dicey, these visual worlds lift me up, a realm where happiness knew no limits. School struggles and teen dreams stood no chance against the epic quest of my screen. Not every game was a wise sage, but they all left a mark, shaping who I am. Among homework, battles, and daydreaming, their stories stay with me. So let's rewind on life and delve into the top 5 video games that turned me into, well, let's shape me as a gamer. Join me on this stroll down memory lane where the games still call out for me. Top 5 goes to Super Mario from 1985. I mean, imagine going back to the early 90s, but most people played the very first Mario. It will take me a couple of years until I was actually playing the game, and I'm playing on my very first console, which was Nintendo. And when I played the game, I remember it was like a timeless gem. It was so easy, it was simplistic, the level design, just like going, it has its charm where you can just jump on different obstacles, not to get hit by any enemies, jump over enemies, jump on enemies. It was just this fun game. And I never actually finished that game because it was so hard. Nowadays, when I got older, I started to see Mario more as a metaphor for some, like, for instance, you can't go back in the game, right? You can't go back, you just go forward. And that's what I think about these days, that the past is the past and you should just move on and just go forward, because if you look back, you will still get stuck in the past. And that's something that I really have thought about when I play like Mario today, because what's done is done. You can't go back, you can't regret it until you die and you have to start over. But that's the principle is there. When you have reached the other side, you have to continue on, and that's about it. Top 4 goes to Star Fox 64. Now that is a game that I really enjoyed when I was younger, because it was a really simplistic and cool, and it was just like a 3D blast from the past, And little did I know that this game was actually a reboot from the first game, because it's very similar if you play it on the Super Nintendo. It's very similar levels. I mean, it's practically the same, but it's more updated graphics. So when I played the Star Fox 64, I really like it because it's so easy and it's like right on. You just play the game spot on. You don't need to go through tutorials, nothing like that. It's just like going to the first map, and the first map is pretty. It's pretty good for first level in the game, because it's like a more or less a tutorial also, because it teaches you the mechanics on the get-go. This game captured my heart because it was so simple and addictive, in a way of you can actually play it more times even after you finish the game, because it's so good. And I think I probably finished the game a couple of times before I got tired, but it's a game where you just you can't forget about it, because it's a memorable title and you still can play it as of today. Now the icing on the cake in the game is pretty much it's a rail shooter. You practically just soaring through the space, trying to maneuver from the debris around you, shooting spaceships, and of course the bosses. But the most cool of the game is when you actually meet the rival team Star Wolf, and you can meet them on a couple occasions, depending on what you do in the game, of course. And that's also something that I also noticed in this game, that depending on how you play the game or what you do in the game, you can actually choose paths or routes. It depends entirely what you do in the game, and that's a really cool feature that Nintendo was very creative with. So of course it's going to be my top 4 game of all time. So number 3 video game that really influenced me was, of course, GoldenEye on Nintendo 64. Now that game was a relic of its time. It was a revolutionary game because of the multiplayer, and the split screen multiplayer was a very cool thing in all time. I think that it actually, it paved for most multiplayer games today. I mean, today we just play online, but back in the day it was like, hanging out on the couch, playing with friends, drinking soda and just, laughing our ass off because we were shooting or using the grenades or proximity mines. It was just a game where you can just like sit there and have a blast, and the most cool thing about that game is that somehow the W7 has this biggest inventory in all video games of all time. I don't know any other video games that has so much weapons in one, on your watch. That's a cool. Well, I mean, if you think about it in adult years, yes, it was a very. Of course, it's unrealistic, but it's something that it's funny today, because most games today you can't really have more than 2 weapons in your inventory, or maybe 1 or 2, and the melee weapon is going to get destroyed if you use it too much. Now, this is a game where you can just you can use your weapon anytime, anywhere. I wasn't really aware of that. I kinda speedrunned some levels to get a cheat code, or to unlock cheats in the game, because that was the whole motivation to replay those levels, because if you replay those levels in some certain time, you unlock cheat codes, and that was something that most people did back then, and it probably paved for today's modern speedrunners. You play the game to beat the record or something like that. It made me play more shooter games because of GoldenEye, because it was so fun to play. Most games back then wasn't really interesting. I mean, football games, sport games wasn't that interesting for me. I still don't play any sport games because I always go to those shooter games because of GoldenEye. Top 2 goes to The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time on Nintendo 64. Now, this game was... At first, I want to say something before I go to that story. I played the first Zelda, but I wasn't really amazed by the game. It wasn't really interesting. So I started, when I played the Ocarina of Time, this game, I can't even explain how I was amazed and fascinated about the graphics, the dialogues, the whole thing about the storyline. I probably spent many hours on just exploring the map of Ocarina of Time. In my opinion, when it comes down to the temples in Ocarina of Time, is that when you finish most of the temples, you get something you get a equipment to progress through the game. For example, there's a part of the game you have to get the hook shot, right? So you have to go to a certain area or a temple, I think, to get the hook shot. I'm not sure if I'm right here, but that's the thing about that game, that is, it motivates you to actually explore further, instead of just doing like in this modern Zelda game, I think Zelda should be a linear game. And that's why I think that Ocarina of Time is still the best Zelda game ever made. Even though that most of the games out there are good, I think that Ocarina of Time is something, it's an entirely different like category. My experience of Ocarina of Time is that I got two special memories of that game where you go to this graveyard or cemetery to find this grave, and you actually descend to this grave. I remember the first time of being there, the whole thing about the atmosphere, the sound, the music in the game. It just like, it got to me. So when you go further into the grave, you see those creatures with hollowed eyes. They are called, I think they're called Red Deads. And these are, I never thought they were doing something until they look at you. When you look at you, your character freezes and this screeching scream comes. And I just like, the first time I heard that, I pretty much got goosebumps and jumped up. And ever since that, I'm trying to avoid that part of the game because I hate those Red Deads. One of the best games I've played that really affected me emotionally. Also that, you know, it's so powerful. Like, you know, when in the end, when you actually meet the final boss, I mean, it's something that you just don't forget when you play the game. Still, like I said, I think the best Zelda is Ocarina of Time. Yeah. And top one goes to Metal Gear Solid 1 on PlayStation. I didn't actually get that game when it was released. I got to play the game when I think it was a couple of years after. And the thing is that my brother came home one day, and you know, he told me that there was a discounted PlayStation or a pre-used or pre-owned PlayStation, which he said that, you know, you can get it for a cheap price, because the thing about that was I think it was faulty. Not sure how or why, but I know that it was faulty. And so when I bought that PlayStation, I got some games too, which was, of course, Metal Gear Solid 1. Now, playing that console was a little bit finicky because the laser somehow couldn't read the discs right. So I had to like flip the console up and downwards like a Rubik's Cube, pretty much. So that made the game work like perfectly. But it was a little bit hassle to change the disc sometimes, because you have to flip over and open the disc and change the disc and then flip over again. But eventually I stopped doing that, and I was trying to see if I can read the disc without actually flipping it. And of course, it actually worked. To my amazement, it actually worked. It was a stealth game, so it wasn't really this typical shooter game. You just go around and shoot people. It's more or less a game where you infiltrate, trying to learn, trying to adapt, trying more get intel. Also motivates you to listen and be attentive, because if you're not attentive and not patient enough, you will lose a lot of information that makes you progress the game, which happened to me because I actually skipped many of the sequences because I just wanted to shoot, which was definitely wrong approach, because I later learned that when you actually, in the beginning, one of the hostages tells you what you have to do next to progress to the game, which is very like, well, it's a common thing. If you want to progress a game, you have to read and listen. But I was a young kid back then. I didn't really pay attention too much. So I learned that you can finish that game just by listening to the DARPA chief's instructions of the hidden wall in the basement we have to blow up with the C4, which I did and got further to the story. The story involves a a guy named Solid Snake, which he's a soldier who infiltrates a nuclear facility and trying to stop, or more or less trying to save hostages, and also eventually trying to stop this nuclear device called Metal Gear. It's trying to make the nuclear silos obsolete, so you can actually launch a nuclear device anytime, anywhere. And that's the whole purpose of Metal Gear, that you can actually walk around mobile around the world with a nuclear device. Either way, Metal Gear Solid is a game that I deeply love, and I will continue on playing the second game, because the second game is one of my favorite Metal Gear Solid games. But I'm going to talk about that in a later video. Why is that so? I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I wasn't really ready to do this video, but I give it a try, I give it a shot. So yeah, I think it's gonna be awesome to show you guys this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I did enjoy doing this production. It's gonna be a learning curve for me from now on, but I'm getting there. Thank you for watching.